everybody. Welcome to the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
And Chip, I owe you and our listeners and Tony Gerdeman and everybody a big apology. I had some technical issues last week, and it was completely my fault. My program that we record this with reset after some updates, and it reset my settings, and my settings were off. So while I sounded fantastic, Chip, I couldn't hear you at all.
Well, maybe that was a blessing for our listeners. I don't know.
So, we didn't have clean audio, so we couldn't put that up. Again, I apologize to everybody involved. It was my bad, and I will endeavor to not let that happen again. I don't think we need to rehash the Miami discussion that we had last week. We both expected a big win. It was a big win. And winning big is becoming a habit with this team, Chip.
Yes, it is. Kind of surprisingly, actually. I mean, at some point there's going to be a test. I'm just not sure when. I'm just hoping that Ohio State is ready and able to meet that test when it does eventually show up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because before we get into the Nebraska breakdown, I know one of the things that I've heard from multiple people online is, and I'm sure it was called in to radio stations. I know that it was addressed in Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr's post-game instant reaction show, was the fact that Ryan Day left Justin Fields in deeper into the game than I think a lot of people would have liked, considering the score was lopsided. But as you mentioned, this team is going to get tested at some point. Ohio State is going to get into a rough, physical, tough game that goes 4 quarters. And no one on this team has gone 4 quarters yet.
No, they haven't. And along those lines, when it came to Justin Fields, yes, I was a little surprised that he was in the game. But I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I think the coaching staff is kind of walking this kind of tightrope, so to speak, of wanting to make sure that they don't expose Justin Fields to undue injury, but they also know that he needs the repetitions, that he needs to be in a game that maybe the scoreboard didn't reflect it. But okay, there have been, I think the previous week it was UCLA had this miraculous comeback. Not that I was expecting anything like that from Nebraska, but I think the coaching staff just kind of figured, we're just going to keep him in through most of the fourth quarter just to make sure that we're giving him, even though we're not going to expose him to injury possibly, we're just going to give him some game reps against a decent opponent.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a part of it, but I have to think that it's a concern to me, at least, that let's say you're in a tight 4-quarter battle with Michigan State possibly this weekend, or Penn State in a couple of weeks, down the line, or Wisconsin, and there's this physical battle, and conditioning is going to come into it in the fourth quarter. And if your team has been given the rest of the day off at halftime, week after week after week, what is Chase Young going to look like in the fourth quarter?
Very good point. I never thought about it that way from a conditioning standpoint. I think it's just, I think right now the biggest issue that Ryan Day and the coaches have to deal with is complacency, quite frankly, is that they're starting to see and hear all the accolades, online and from around the country. So keeping these guys focused and hungry is going to be something that's going to be a challenge for the remainder of the season.
Absolutely. Well, why don't we get into the Nebraska breakdown a little bit now? Again, since I didn't post the show last week because it would have been just my audio, I didn't. We didn't get our picks to click out there. We did get our predictions in the Ozone Weekly staff predictions piece. You and I both predicted Nebraska would score 24 points. That didn't even come close to happening. And you had Ohio State scoring 49. They scored 48, so that's very good on you, Chip.
Thank you.
I had 38, thinking that, again, it would be a tighter game, and, with Nebraska having the ball and being able to move the ball a bit, I just didn't think that they'd have enough possessions to put up 49. So I had 38. 24. You had 49-24. Actual score 48-7. The fourth consecutive 40-plus point win for the Buckeyes.
And that's unbelievable. If you had said a month ago that, okay, you're gonna see an Ohio State team that's going to be putting up 40 points on a weekly basis, nobody would have believed that.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly this has come together. And, you know, if you would have told me before the season started that after week 5, Ohio State would be 5-0, okay, I would have believed that. If you would have told me that the nearest margin of victory opponent was FAU, I wouldn't have believed you in a million years.
I thought that was one of the most impressive things that I saw you tweet prior to our recording of the podcast, is that I never thought about it that way, is that's been the closest victory that Ohio State has had, is the season opener against Florida Atlantic.
So crazy game in Lincoln. Of course, that crowd was amped up. The stadium was full. It was rocking. It was ready to go. And you know that those fans were ready to explode. And Ohio State never gave those fans a chance to explode. They have this tradition in Lincoln that they hold on to these red helium balloons. They let them go the first time Nebraska scores. And they didn't get to release those until late in the game when it was already 48-0.
And that's kind of becoming Ohio State's tradition there at Lincoln, is they come into town and they're so excessively dominant over the Cornhuskers that by the end of the game, all of the enthusiasm that Nebraska fans have for the game, they just, okay, I guess we can release our balloons now. Like they try and find some kind of an excuse or circumstance that might be reasonably appropriate for them to finally release these balloons that they've been clutching on or holding for, multiple quarters.
It was just complete domination. I mean, Nebraska didn't score until there was 2:07 remaining in the third quarter when Dedrick Mills ran a 9-yard touchdown run on a group of largely backup defenders and put Nebraska on the board. And I didn't think that Ohio State would shut out Nebraska, but I did start to believe that could happen until Brendan White missed a sack on Adrian Martinez, and he ran 56 yards to put them in position for that touchdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as equally impressive this season so far has been the complete transformation of the Ohio State defense. That, you're looking at, by and large, the cast of characters, the personnel, with obviously the Nick Bosa and Draymond Jones and some other players that have moved on, but almost the entire defense from last year is here. And look at just the complete turnaround and the results that you see on the field. Now, yeah, they gave up a touchdown to the backups, but if you had said again at the beginning of the season that the Ohio State defense would be as dominant as they have appeared through the first 5 games of the season, I wouldn't have believed that either.
Yeah, exactly. So Ohio State deferred, won the coin toss. Ryan Day is getting really good at winning the coin toss too. He's come a long way as a coach. And Nebraska started with the ball, and the first play, Ohio State snuffed it out, stopped it. But then Malik Harrison, your pick to click, Chip, with a ridiculously late hit out of bounds. And that was the kind of thing that you think right off the bat. It's like, oh, is it going to be one of those nights? And giving Nebraska 15 free yards. And they were pinned deep because they brought the ball out of the end zone on the kickoff, and it was well covered by the defense. And I believe there was also a holding penalty that backed them up inside their own 10-yard line. So they were way backed up. Ohio State, really amped up, and apparently Malik Harrison a little too amped up as he made the late hit out of bounds, gave Nebraska some breathing room. They were able to pick up a couple first downs and take a 6-play drive out to their 40 with the help of that penalty. And then Ohio State said, okay, enough of that, shut it down, and then came back the other way and scored. And they just kept scoring. This one was a Justin Fields 15-yard run to start the scoring. But before the first quarter was over, they would add a second with KJ Hill receiving a 2-yard pass. You get into the second quarter, Blake Hobbiel kicks a 23-yard field goal. That was after the only third down conversion that failed in the entire first half for Ohio State. Second quarter touchdown, a couple of touchdown runs for Master Teague, who was fantastic. Austin Mack scored on an 18-yard pass, and the game was over. It was 38-0 at halftime.
And I think at one point, Tom Orr made a really good point as it relates to Nebraska with Adrian Martinez. I think out of the first 7 passes that Adrian Martinez attempted, he had only completed 2 to Nebraska, but he completed 3 to Ohio State defenders. That he was just having a really rough go of it.
Yeah, it was a big night for the defense all around, but of course Jeffrey Okudah has this has been his coming out party season. We kind of thought it might be, but he had never had an interception before last week against Miami, and this week he decided he liked it because he had 2.
Yeah, especially one of them. He was even seated, and he was able to come up with the interception.
And that second one when he was on the ground, that thwarted Nebraska's best looking drive of the entire game against the first team.
Undoubtedly so. I mean, that might have been kind of like the psychological, like if you, I don't want to say that basically that they were done at that point, but as you said, that was probably the best looking drive that they had, and for it to come up, as a result of a tipped pass that then Jeffrey Okudah, while he was seated, was able to intercept, and then Ohio State was able to capitalize off of that turnover. I think that might have psychologically done a lot more damage to Nebraska than Ohio State fans realized.
Yeah, Nebraska was out of ideas, Chip, and they went to a bag of tricks. Scott Frost pulled out some things that Ohio State did not prepare for, and a lot of like quick fullback trap hits up the middle. We didn't expect to see Adrian Martinez under center and doing things like that, and it worked. It caught Ohio State off guard, and credit to the Ohio State coaching staff. They took a timeout and said, "Look, we've talked about this. We've addressed this type of offense before, but it's been a while, so let's sit everybody down and give them a refresher." And from that point on, Nebraska didn't even really try it a whole lot more because they shut it down, and then every so often you would see Nebraska try something that they had worked on that drive, and it didn't work. So kudos to the coaching staff for a very quick adjustment.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think their clock management in the sense of, okay, let's get everyone settled down. Let's make sure we're all on the same page. That was something that a year ago that you did not see from the defensive coaches. And, for Ryan Day to recognize, hey, why don't we regroup? Let's figure out what it is that they're doing, and let's make sure that everybody knows what their assignments are. And we're able, as you said, to effectively shut that down. I think that was crucial.
So the second half, the Buckeyes tacked on another Hobbiel field goal. He was 2 for 2. So good for him, because that was a concern I had, is that there was really no indication that there was a confidence in the kicking game. And Hobbiel answered that in this game with a pair of field goals, not terribly long, 23 yards and 36 yards, but you got to start a streak somewhere, and that's what he did. Then a touchdown pass, 6 yards from Fields to Garrett Wilson. Just this kid is going to be phenomenal, Chip. I mean, just in the corner of the end zone, blanket coverage, goes up and gets the ball, somehow gets both feet inbounds in the corner of the end zone. We had about 6 inches there to do so, and made it 48-0 at that point.
And you're absolutely right about Garrett Wilson's touchdown reception, because at first glance, the television angle when they first showed it, it didn't look like, okay, did he get a foot down? And then as they showed it in on the replay from the other angle, not only did he get 1 foot down, he, as you said, he got, I think he was able to tap his feet like 2 or 3 times before colliding with that wall and still holding on to the ball. And just kind of, as you said, I think he is definitely going to be something else to watch over the next few years.
Wilson also had another very good punt return, very electric punt return, but this one was called back on a 7 Banks penalty for a block in the back. And so you're getting these glimpses now of how good this freshman wide receiver is, and he's not going to be here 4 years, folks.
No, he is not. If anything, it's a credit to Ryan Day that I know we'll talk about some of the other freshmen that Ryan Day is recognizing the talent that's within his arsenal, and he's playing them. That Garrett Wilson is one of the most prominent ones, but there are a lot of other talented freshmen who are also making solid contributions to this team already.
Mm-hmm. So Nebraska, as I said, they tacked on a Dedrick Mills touchdown run late in the third quarter. Nobody scored in the fourth quarter. Ohio State put in Chris Chugunov and basically ran the ball and ran out the clock. I mean, they were milking it. They didn't want to really embarrass Nebraska any more than had already happened, and you could tell they took their foot way off the pedal offensively. Defensively, you can only do so much taking your foot off the gas, and the defense did a great job of continuing. Even the backups did a great job of continuing to buckle down. There was another potential Nebraska scoring drive late that got thwarted on fourth down. So a good, complete win, certainly a bigger win than I expected. The Buckeyes racked up 580 yards, which you and I both knew there were some holes in that Nebraska defense. And we knew that there were some issues with the offensive line on the offensive side, but we had so much, I think, respect for Nebraska's skill players that we thought that they'd be able to hit some plays, and they did not. And Martinez was completely shut down and ineffective, with the exception of, again, against mostly backups. He broke a tackle in the backfield. It should have been a sack for Brendan White and went 56 yards with it. But we didn't see anything out of Wan'Dale Robinson and J.D. Spielman.
No, just looking at Wan'Dale Robinson's stats, he carried the ball 9 times for 27 yards. He only had 1 reception for 8 yards. He was basically a non-factor. I mean, in terms of like kickoff returns, that's where he made his biggest mark, because Ohio State kept kicking the ball back off to Nebraska after scoring. He had 6 kickoff returns for 51 yards, so about 8.5 yards. His longest one was 18, but you're right. I mean, we definitely, and I still do have a lot of respect for Nebraska offensively, but they just ran into a juggernaut on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, and there was very little that they could get done.
So Adrian Martinez's stat line: 8 of 17, 3 interceptions. He threw 2 to Okudah, 1 to Jordan Fuller. 47 yards passing, no touchdowns, sacked 4 times. He ran it 15 times for 81 yards, but he got 56 of that 81 on one play.
Right. I mean, that was, again, late in the game. It was not, the game was no longer even in contest. Like it was not even something where, oh, okay, are they making a rally here? No, that was late in the game. And as you said, when Nebraska later on in the game, when they had the opportunity to score again, the backup Ohio State defenders were effective at thwarting Adrian Martinez to the point where he wasn't sacked, but he was about to be sacked. I mean, he just, he was scrambling backwards and basically fell down because he had nowhere to go with the ball. Mm-hmm. And Nebraska had to turn the ball over on downs.
So Ohio State 580 yards. Nebraska ended up with 231, but really had 91 or so, with the exception of the two long drives against the backups. So it was just a complete shutdown. Wan'Dale Robinson's his complete claim to fame in this game is he got lit up by Pete Werner in a way that I haven't seen in a long time.
That was a stick. I mean, for Chris Fowler, who was calling the game with Kirk Herbstreit, saying you could hear that all the 12 stories up or whatever. I can't remember exactly how Fowler described it, mm-hmm. about just the sheer volume and the intensity of that hit. And not that I don't want to suggest that you ever want to see anyone get hurt, because I don't. But if there's somebody that I genuinely felt happy for as a result of that, it was Pete Werner, in the sense that he was was very much maligned last year. So for him to make such a big play, it just makes me feel good that, okay, I think the Ohio State fan base that was so critical of him, I think they're starting to realize, it probably wasn't all his fault last year, that he was probably put in a lot of bad scheme situations that made him look to be a worse player than he actually is.
Well, the more we see this defense this year, the more we see that the players, the names on the players haven't changed. So obviously it was a scheme coaching scheme / coaching thing.
I agree.
So the Buckeyes, Chip, ran for 368 yards in Lincoln. That's a 6.9 yards per carry average. That's pretty good. That's going to get it done. Your pick to click was a running back, J.K. Dobbins. And J.K. Dobbins actually was fantastic. He didn't score a touchdown, Chip, but 24 carries, 178 yards. He had a long of 26. But it seemed like he had about 5 of those carries for about 26 yards.
Yeah, he didn't score a touchdown. You're right. And he did not show up in terms of, he didn't catch the ball, but he ran hard. I mean, that's kind of, the fact that he averaged, nearly 7.5 yards a carry, that he kind of represented the way that I thought he would, as being kind of like the workhorse of the offense. Now, granted, I think he is truly the beneficiary of superb quarterback play so far this season from Justin Fields. Mm-hmm. We were giving a lot of well-deserved accolades to the receiving corps. They all are definitely impact players in their own right, but J.K. Dobbins is definitely is what this Ohio State offense is going to be built around, and he certainly represented himself well in Lincoln on Saturday night.
Yes, indeed. Went over 3,000 yards for his Ohio State career, so congratulations to J.K. Master Teague had 77 yards on just 12 carries, a 6.4-yard average, 2 touchdowns. Justin Fields, 72 yards on 12 carries, 6.0 average, and his long was 41 yards, and he hit us with a Braxton Miller stutter step.
Very impressive. If anything, I was wondering if that was done, like in terms of, okay, are we showing off, or was there actually a strategy behind that? But he, if there's anything that I'm going to stammer about when it comes to Justin Fields is, he certainly has, as he showed on Saturday night, he has the talent to carry the ball. I just will only hope that the coaching staff, which has been, very judicious in their use of him as a ball carrier, that they keep that up, because for all of the well-deserved accolades that Justin Fields has received 5 weeks into the season, is that there's still a lot of football for Ohio State to play.
Mm-hmm. I do believe that was an effort to shake loose of the one deep safety who had pretty good speed, had an angle on him, and it was almost enough, Chip, because he, despite the guy having the angle on him and really the near sideline, he almost had to horse collar Justin Fields to get him down. He was almost by him. One more half a split second indecision on that DB, and he would have taken it to the house.
I think you're right. Like I said, I mean, how it just goes back to, okay, let's, if necessary, if you can score, then do so. But as you said, like that horse collar tackle that, what if that had resulted in, some kind of an injury? That's where you would have kind of said, man, why didn't he just run out of bounds or something? So I'm not telling him to, not try and score, but again, try to minimize the hits, Justin.
Well, can't play scared. I bet you that move worked for him every time in high school, like every single time.
I'm certain it did.
And then, you know what? The running back with the longest run of the evening, Marcus Crowley. 4 carries, 45 yards, and 36 of that came in one chunk.
And he's one of those true freshmen I was just talking about. They're, being game 5, we're beyond the point of, okay, well, like you can only play in 4 games and still possibly claim a redshirt year. And, Marcus Crowley has certainly demonstrated that, no, he's worth giving the ball to. With a lot of the games that are still left to be played for Ohio State, I think Marcus Crowley has emerged as a viable ball carrier for Ohio State.
Yeah, Marcus Crowley will not redshirt, but it looks like probably Steel Chambers will redshirt, and that's fine because you got to get some separation. There's some real talent in that OSU backfield. Justin Fields went 15 of 21, no interceptions again, 212 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was sacked 3 times, and that's one thing that Justin Fields needs to work on a little bit. Those 2 of those probably didn't need to happen.
I agree with you because if there's a flaw in his game is that he does seem to think he has a lot more time back there and I think getting rid of the ball, he's been really good. Obviously you can't complain about turnovers because there haven't been any. He hasn't thrown any interceptions. But one of the things that he's doing well, but he could probably be better, is when something isn't there to throw it out of bounds, and or to take off up the field. And I know I'm sounding like I'm talking on both sides of my mouth here, but take off for positive yardage and then scoot out of bounds to avoid any hits. Versus like you said, taking some unnecessary sacks.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we talked about your pick to click on offense, J.K. Dobbins. He definitely clicked. Mine was Chris Olave. He had 3 catches for 30 yards. I'm going to say he did not click. I'm going to say he was fine, but a pick to click for me is somebody that puts up bigger numbers than 3 catches for 30 yards. It was a quiet 30-yard night for Chris Olave. Austin Mack, 3 catches, 66 yards and a touchdown. In fact, could have had a long touchdown, but he stumbled coming out of his break and did well to catch the ball, but then he went down pretty much on his own, and had he not stumbled, he was gone.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm sure you saw as he was coming out of that break, how badly he burned the defensive back who was covering him. I mean, like he had that guy completely turned around, twisted up like a pretzel.
Yeah, Austin Mack hit him with the double move, and the double move, he bought it hook, line, and sinker. And, I mean, Mack, despite stumbling, had 10 or 15 yards on him.
Yeah, so I was happy. I'm happy for Austin Mack because, you were just talking about Chris Olave and, some of the other wide receivers like Garrett Wilson who have kind of been emerging this year. Austin Mack, everyone's been kind of wondering, what's happened to him? He's fine. He's doing, like this game, if anything, averaging 22 yards a catch. He had a touchdown. I mean, I think it's just been, I think he had some nagging injuries at the beginning of the year, and I think he's certainly developing into a solid part of that wide receiver rotation.
Mm-hmm. Just to wrap this up, KJ Hill, 5 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. KJ was the security blanket, not a lot of yards, but the most catches. He always seemed to be getting that first down, and it was a nice night for KJ, who 5 more catches toward his quest to become Ohio State's all-time leading receiver in terms of reception. So good night for him. Wilson only had the one catch for 6 yards, but a great catch it was. Luke Farrell, 1 catch. Benjamin Victor and Master Teague each with a catch. So, it was spread around. Ohio State didn't need to throw the ball a lot because they ran so effectively, and we thought this might be a game where we might see more of Justin Fields throwing the ball all over because maybe he would have to. But even in 3rd and longs, they didn't really shy away from running and running successfully. In fact, we saw a new wrinkle with the quarterback sweep on a 3rd and 10, and that was very successful.
Yeah, I mean, that again, I think they're just putting as much out there, maybe, to try and get, some of their coming opponents to make them stop and think. But I just think, Ryan Day just knows he's got, such a versatile player in Justin Fields, in terms of his passing, in terms of his running ability, that I think he's trying to make the most out of, getting the most out of him for the benefit of the Ohio State offense.
Mm-hmm. All right, on defense, Chip, your pick to click was Malik Harrison. Great pick because that would have been my pick, but I let you go first. 3 solo, 4 assists for 7 tackles, 1 sack, 4-yard tackle for loss. So good night for Malik Harrison, despite the unfortunate penalty to start the game. Big night for Baron Browning, also seven tackles. He had half a sack, 2 tackles for loss. Jordan Fuller next with 6 tackles. My pick to click was Pete Werner, as I went off the chart a little bit, and he only had 3 tackles, all solos. He had a tackle for loss, but I'm going to give him a click because of that hit, and also because it doesn't show up in the stats really when 6 guys jump on the ball carrier, but every time like 5 or 6 guys jumped on the ball carrier, he was one of those 5 or 6, it seemed like.
Well, I certainly agree that Pete Werner, I mean, just that like earth-shattering tackle, that in and of itself was worthy of the click to pick. Absolutely.
So Chase Young got another strip sack.
Yes.
Didn't recover this one, but it still counts as a strip sack. So forced fumble, a sack, and he is blowing up, and he will probably continue blowing up for Ohio State. He just looks like a man amongst boys. Even when he's not making the play, he is affecting the play, and he turned. Well, I mean, he got Malik Harrison his sack because he's the one that chased Adrian Martinez toward where Malik Harrison was coming from. So it was you don't get anything for that. You just get to give a high five to your teammate, say good job. But that was a play that Chase Young made. And there was one sack where I think there were like 7 guys that jumped on the pile. We're like, how in the world are they going to give this sack? How are they going to divide this up? But they must have figured it out. But Ohio State ended up with 4 sacks. Jocelyn Wint had 1. Jayshon Cornell and Baron Browning each had a half of one. I'm assuming that's the one where there were like 7 guys involved. And Chase Young with the strip sack and Malik Harrison with the sack that courtesy of Chase Young chasing young Adrian Martinez into his arms. So a good night for everybody involved. And again, we saw a lot of defenders, backup defenders on the field. Saw a lot of Dallas Gant in the second half. Jocelyn Wint, Sevyn Banks, and on and on. I think Damon Arnett had a very quiet night because Adrian Martinez couldn't throw the football. If you would have told me before the season started, J.D. Spielman is going to have 1 catch for 7 yards in this game, I would have not believed that at all.
As I said a few moments ago, the defensive performance that this team has been giving the fans, in every game. I mean, you never ever would have expected it, and that was something that we talked about last week. I know I wrote about it for the Ozone. Was my concern about J.D. Spielman in the open field, specifically as a punt returner. And like you said, he was a non-factor. He was not nearly as involved or as influential as I certainly thought he was going to be for Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. So, Chip, 27 players graded out as champions after the Nebraska win. Of course, the week before we didn't have a podcast, but we did talk about it, and there were very few champions the week before, and that was, as you and I suspect, a psychological ploy by Ryan Day to say, hey, you got a lot of improving to do if you think you're going to go into Lincoln and just push people around like you did Miami. And, well, they did. So I guess it worked. Either Day was wrong or it worked. Either one.
No, I certainly think, he's trying to find what buttons he can push to make sure this team does not become complacent and doesn't start to rest on its laurels. I mean, it's very, very difficult, especially when, like every week you have to kind of look for some kind of a reason to, have these guys motivated. And, with Nebraska, I think that was a case of, all right, these guys came into Ohio Stadium last year and, truth be told, outplayed Ohio State for the majority of that game. I mean, Ohio State won the game, but Nebraska, I mean, they gave it everything they had and came within, I think a score of winning the game last year. And I think he didn't really have to do a lot of motivating for this one. I think these guys were hungry to show that they were certainly better than what they did last year when Nebraska came to Columbus.
Hungry just seems to be the default setting for this team this year. They seem to be have their heads on straight. They know that what they need to do. They're focused on getting better every week and not really, reading too much into the hype. At least that's what is coming out, in the media. But of course, these are young men, so who knows what they're really thinking in private. But I think it's been just a dream start to the season, and hopefully the dream continues as the Spartans come to town after they seemingly have righted the ship following the home loss to Arizona State. They look like they have things going in the right situation, despite the fact that they had a pretty good scare from Indiana. They kind of turned it on when they needed to, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Big Ten after we talk about this, wrap up the Ohio State talk here. Players of the game on defense, there were two, Jordan Fuller and Jeffrey Okuda. That's pretty much no-brainers. The only really shocking thing was Okuda didn't get named Big Ten Player of the Week on defense. That one went to a Wisconsin player who played Northwestern's mighty offense. But the offensive line MVP or player of the game for Ohio State, Josh Alabi, and he's a guy who started in place of Brandon Bowen, who did dress for the game, made the trip, and did go through warm-ups, but they decided to go with Josh Alabi, and he had a fantastic game, as did the entire offensive line.
Yeah, I'm glad. Excuse me. I'm glad that you mentioned that because, Josh Alabi is one of those guys that, for the last few years, has always been kind of on the tip of the tongue of. It didn't matter, like Urban Meyer, Ryan Day, he could possibly, he's in the starting contention, at the different positions. And he started last year in the Rose Bowl for Thayer Munford. He was starting in the summer when Thayer Munford was kind of, being on a limited participation because of his back. And when Brandon Bowen was out, for Ohio State to have the confidence and for Alabi to have the versatility to say, okay, I'll play right tackle then, and come in, and the offensive line didn't miss a beat. You're talking about how dominant they were offensively. That's a credit to the offensive line giving Justin Fields and the running backs and everybody enough time. So I completely agree. I think Josh Alabi being named a champion is certainly well deserved.
And Blake Hobbiel was the special teams player of the week. The offensive champions were Justin Fields, J.K. Dobbins, Master Teague, Luke Farrell, Rashad Berry, Austin Mack, K.J. Hill, Chris Olave, Benjamin Victor, Garrett Wilson, Thayer Munford, Jonah Jackson, Josh Myers, Wyatt Davis, and Josh Olave, obviously. Defensively, Chase Young, he's been won all 5 weeks, as has Chris Olave, Jayshon Cornell, Davon Hamilton, Jonathan Cooper, who returned to the lineup finally. B.B. Landers, Pete Werner, Malik Harrison, Sean Wade, Damon Arnett, Davon Hamilton, and Chase Young and Chris Olave, the only 5-time players to grade out as champions this season. And, that's what can you say? You wrap up a thorough beatdown of Nebraska with 27 champions.
Yeah, nobody saw that coming. I think game day, they certainly thought that this game was going to be a lot closer. They wouldn't have made the trek out to Lincoln if they didn't think so. Mm-hmm. For them to, see Ohio State up at 38-0 at the half was certainly probably something that they were kind of second guessing themselves. Like, why did we choose this game? Mm-hmm. But I'm certainly glad that the entire country got an opportunity to see how dominant this Ohio State team has been.
Yeah, it was something, and you're starting to see people changing their tune about Ohio State in terms of how they're seeing them. You're hearing a lot more people talking about them in the same breath as Clemson and Alabama and and Georgia and LSU, the top teams. I think it was Desmond Howard even has him in the top 4 and as potentially the best team in the country right now, which always makes me nervous. whenever Desmond Howard starts to get on the Buckeye bandwagon because he's just wrong so often. But it certainly does look so far like a deserving accolade for Ohio State. And of course, there's so much of the season still left to play, and these next 3 weeks are not going to be easy. There's Michigan State next at home. That game's going to be a blackout, Chip. Do you like the blackouts?
I'm not a big fan. I know I'm going to probably incur the wrath, possibly of you, possibly of all other Ohio State fans. To me, I don't know. I understand that a lot of people will come back at me and saying, oh, how the recruits like it and this and that. I just think, something, a lot of the other programs around the country you just rattled off, like Alabama, and they don't do anything like this, and they're doing fine with recruiting. I understand why they do it. I'm just not a huge fan of it. But hey, if the program believes that it's in their best interest, so be it.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but mostly it's not that I find anything really wrong with the alternate uniforms that they generally do a good job with picking nice looking alternate uniforms. The problem for me is I like our scarlet uniforms so much. I like our normal uniforms so much that it's, you don't get to wear them only a few times a year. So, now you're turning down an opportunity to wear them.
Yeah. And it's the thing is, like, with that uniform that I presume that they're going to be wearing on Saturday, unless I'm mistaken, is with the numbering being in scarlet, it's very difficult. I know for a fact that it's extremely difficult for like somebody like Paul Keels when he's trying to call, who carried the ball or who caught it or something. It's very difficult to see. So, like I said, I'm not a real huge fan.
All right. Well, let's take a little lap around the Big Ten, Chip. Penn State and Maryland started things off on Friday night because apparently Friday night Big Ten football is a thing now that I don't really like, but I guess it's here. Penn State showed its displeasure with Friday night games by pounding Maryland 59-0, and I guess we saw a little fool's gold in those first couple games out of Maryland.
Yeah. The only thing I dislike more than the blackout is Friday night football for the Big Ten. But in all seriousness, yeah, Maryland, they certainly have come down to earth over the last two games that they played. Penn State, I think that they certainly have, as evidenced by the final score, the talent differential between the two programs is quite substantial.
So Penn State right now looks like a good team. They're ranked 12th. The thing is about Penn State though is, and maybe they'll fix this by the end of the season, they cannot run the football. Their leading rusher this week was Sean Clifford, the quarterback, 7 carries for 54 yards. And if you can't run the football and you start playing Ohio State's and Wisconsin's, that's going to be a problem.
Well, I'm gonna even say before they run into Ohio State is, I want to say it's not this weekend, but the weekend of October 12th when Ohio State has their first bye week. Penn State is going to be going to Iowa, and that might be a very interesting game for Penn State.
Mm-hmm. So they look like their defense is pretty good, but then again, Maryland, we don't know. Maryland started out like a house on fire, and maybe they burnt down. I don't know, because they've done nothing since then. Of course, the Buckeyes win big against Nebraska. For me, this game, the game I thought was very interesting, and I didn't expect it to be a close, good game, was Wisconsin and Northwestern. And that one ends up 24-15. It was an incredibly curious call by Pat Fitzgerald in this game to go for 2 when his team was just about to make it, I think, a score that would have pulled them within 1 score. And they didn't make the 2-point conversion. So they end up scoring again, or actually it would have put them within 2 scores. So they come down and they score again they go for 2 and don't get it, and they ended up losing by 9 points. But they were tough. They hung around in that game and they really made Jack Cohn look really bad in this game. He was 15 of 24, 113 yards and an interception, no touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor was decent, 26 carries, 119 yards and a touchdown, but that's not a normal Jonathan Taylor day.
No. I think Northwestern, they certainly have the defense. I think offensively they're very, very challenged. But as you said, I think they were able to kind of bring Wisconsin back down to earth. What makes you wonder if Wisconsin was still basking in the glory of that beatdown they put on Michigan in the week before. But yeah, Northwestern defensively, the talent is there. It's just, I was watching that game, and yeah, it was very puzzling why Pat Fitzgerald, what the logic was in going for the 2-point conversion there. But yeah, I mean, I think Wisconsin is certainly better than they showed against Northwestern. And Northwestern, if they could just figure out what they want to do offensively, they could certainly be much more improved than what they've been showing.
Mm-hmm. So I have no problem with going for 2 points at some point if you want to win the game. But I've always been a big proponent of don't go for 2 unless you have to. Until you have to go for 2, don't go for 2. Or if you want to late in the game and you think, I don't want to get in an overtime slugfest with this team, I want to go for 2. I have no problem with North Carolina going for 2 against Clemson. They called a ridiculous play call, but I have no problem with the decision to go for 2. But in this one, it was just curious. And Pat Fitzgerald brought information to the post-game press conference to back up his decision and why he made it. He's been talking about analytics people, and I don't know that those analytics people went to Northwestern, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think Northwestern, well, we were just talking about Nebraska. I mean, that's who Northwestern plays this weekend. So we'll see if the Wildcats, if they can rebound from a tough loss to Wisconsin, try and right their ship, so to speak.
Yeah, it was about the most competent I've seen Northwestern look this year. They have not looked very good, but they looked pretty competent against Wisconsin on the road, and they probably had the Badgers probably a little bit nervous in that game a little bit. But Fitzgerald's going to Fitzgerald, and it didn't come off. But it could have been, I mean, had they kicked those 2 extra points, they're within a touchdown and an extra point of tying it. So it was a curious decision to me. Iowa wins 48-3 over Middle Tennessee. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chip. That is a larger margin of victory against Middle Tennessee than Michigan had.
It certainly is, and I'll tell you what, I think for all of the goodwill that Michigan seems to be experiencing right now because they beat up on Rutgers, and I know we'll talk about them, I'm thinking Iowa's going to do okay against the Wolverines this weekend. I think Iowa's going to come out ahead on that one.
Okay. So you mentioned that. Rutgers and Michigan. Michigan wins 52-0 at home. Rutgers is really bad. Now, in fairness, Michigan had a larger margin of victory over Rutgers than Iowa did. So since I said it one way, I got to say it the other way and be fair. Chris Ash is no longer the head coach at Rutgers.
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, I think everybody that kind of could see the writing on the wall, probably Chris Ash himself before the season began. I mean, that's just a very, very difficult job. I know that there's a lot of strong speculation that Greg Schiano is going to return. But I think Rutgers, I mean, I can't remember the interim head coach. I know he's served as the tight ends coach, and he's going to be the interim head coach for the remainder of the season. But I think Rutgers, I mean, they're basically already, with the athletic director already talking about, looking for candidates for the job. I think they're ready to turn the page to 2020 as quickly as possible.
Well, obviously, Rutgers is going to be phenomenal now if Chris Ash was what was holding them back.
Oh, I'm sure.
Is there cause for concern, Chip, that the leading rusher for Michigan against Rutgers ran for 48 yards?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what what Tom Orr and Tony Gerdeman, when they were talking about that this summer, is that the backfield for Michigan is not good. And we already know that Shea Patterson isn't any good. Rutgers, I guess, is, kind of like the cure for everything that ails you. But in all seriousness, I think that's why I feel very confident that Iowa's going to come into Michigan and beat them, because I think Iowa, even though they're kind of no frills, I think defensively they'll be able to shut down that pretty much non-existent Michigan running game. And now your offensive hopes are going to rise and probably fall on the performance of Shea Patterson. So that's why I feel confident that the Hawkeyes are going to do it to the Wolverines this weekend.
All right. Patterson hasn't been great, but he was 17 of 23, 276 yards and a touchdown in this game against a dreadful Rutgers team. He also ran for 3 touchdowns. So everybody's going to feel pretty good about Shea Patterson again for another week, and then they'll play Iowa. So Michigan State, I mentioned, they beat Indiana. This game ended up 40-31, but it wasn't that big of a margin of victory. Indiana scored to tie that game late, it was 31-31, and the Michigan State Spartans had like a minute and a half left on the play. They left to play. Lewerke throws a jump ball downfield and it works, and he gets him into field goal range. Then he carries the ball down inside the 5. They end up basically killing the clock and kicking a field goal and leaving just enough time for a kickoff. So they led 34-31. They kicked off. Indiana got the ball for one play and tried a lateral play that went hilariously wrong and ended up getting lateraled back into their own end zone, where Michigan State fell on it to make it a 40-31 final. But it was a bigger scare than that for Sparty. Lewerke threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. But Lewerke also, here it is again, he's their leading rusher also with 78 yards on 12 carries. What's going on with Michigan State?
I think in terms of going into the season, everyone knew Michigan State defensively was going to be a tough outfit. I just think Brian Lewerke obviously can throw the ball, but they have not been able to, no matter who they have in the backfield. I think Elijah Collins is the most common Michigan State running back. I think he had a touchdown for the Spartans in this one, but yeah, they don't have the talent in the backfield like they've had in the previous seasons.
Chip, how are you going to talk to your children about an undefeated Minnesota football team?
Reluctantly, because let's face it, the fact that they're 4-0, that was something. Now in their non-conference, they were able to win those games by the skin of their teeth. In this game against Purdue, they actually had a pretty decent lead, and then they kind of squandered it and kind of held on against Purdue. They're 4-0, which is somewhat surprising. But I think sooner or later, I think the magic's going to run out for Minnesota. Maybe not this weekend, because I know that they're playing Illinois, but I think sooner or later, I think the tide's going to turn against the Golden Gophers and PJ Fleck.
Mm-hmm. So Minnesota is 4-0, as you mentioned. They were up 38-17 after 3, and Purdue tacked on 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to make it interesting. But Minnesota doesn't have a big margin of victory, but they keep grinding out wins under PJ Fleck, and brings me to I think an interesting question based on what we've seen this year, and that's and this may not be a trend or a cycle, or it could just end up being a one-year thing. But with the way Michigan has looked when they're not playing Rutgers, the way that Penn State can't run the football, and Michigan State sort of being a big old question mark, is the West starting to catch up with the East in the Big Ten? And the reason I ask that is, Northwestern's coming off a season where they made it to the championship game in the conference, and then this year Wisconsin and Iowa both look very good. They're both undefeated. Nebraska was supposed to be good, but Ohio State has pretty much exposed that team. That said, Nebraska could still, do some damage in the Big Ten West race, and Minnesota's undefeated. So, is the West starting to turn the tables, or are they just having a good year? How do you see this?
That's that's a really good question. I'm gonna ask for a little bit more time, and I know I'm not gonna get it, but the reason why I'm saying that with a smile on my face is because, as I said a few moments ago, Iowa is playing Michigan this weekend. The following week, on October 12th, Penn State goes to Iowa. I know you just referenced Minnesota, how Minnesota, they're going to play Penn State in November. So I think we'll have a better feel for, as you said, like some of those quote unquote better teams in the Big Ten West, as we see, throughout the Big Ten schedule as it progresses, because I know that Wisconsin. I mean, we all know that Wisconsin crushed Michigan a few weeks ago. It wasn't even close. I'm kind of curious to see how Michigan does against Iowa, and that might give me a better feel for the talent level or possibly the disparity between them. Obviously Ohio State's the class of the Big Ten. I say that, as we record this podcast, we're obviously, I'm obviously very, very biased, but I think the results speak for themselves. Wisconsin, up until this past Saturday, was kind of showing themselves to be a legitimate, second team behind Ohio State, but then they kind of, against Northwestern, didn't really look too good. So I'm just kind of in a wait and see mode. I think Wisconsin and Iowa are certainly better. I'm just not prepared to say that they're conclusively better than, like Penn State yet. I know that you said Penn State can't really run the ball, but I want to see when they have to play against Iowa in a week, and how Michigan does against Iowa this weekend. I want to see what the results, what they turn out to be.
Same. All right. So that's a pretty good look at the Big Ten, Chip. The Buckeyes, incidentally, have scored 262 points this season in 5 games. The closest Big Ten team to that is Penn State at 262 points in the rearview mirror.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Did not know that. Yeah.
Penn State, though, has only given up 30 points this season to Ohio State's 43. But, of course, most of the 43 that Ohio State gave up was to FAU, which we all saw coming.
Exactly.
All right. So, anything else you want to talk about with the Big Ten, or no?
Well, I guess do we want to talk about listener questions? Because this kind of impacts.
Yeah, we did have a listener question that we answered last week, although no one heard it. And I did want to get back to that, so thank you for reminding me of that. We had a question about the clock stopping after first downs. And did you, like I did, Chip, did you make a mental note to check on that this week?
I was not able to find about that information. What did you get?
Okay, so I didn't actually look anything up. I just watched games, and when teams got first downs, I paid attention to what was going on to see, because let me find the tweet. We had a question from Adam at Frisco Buck on Twitter. Why is the clock not always stopping on first downs this year? He said it happened right before the half for Ohio State, Indiana, and also Michigan State, Arizona State with a minute left. And this is what I just watching games, this is what I saw. The clock is still stopping when a first down is picked up, provided that the referee notices that it's a first down and signals that it's that he should stop the clock. but they are making a very concerted effort to spot the ball very quickly as possible this year. It seems like they're getting it spotted quicker and marking it ready for play more quickly, and so there are not as many delays. And if you, like, let's say you get tackled near the middle of the field, then they don't have to move the ball very far to spot it. So I think a lot of these times maybe the ball was almost down where they were spotting it, and it was just almost like simultaneous. But because I don't know the exact instances that Adam is discussing, but I noticed that there were some lengthy stoppages and some quick ones, and it seemed to me to depend on where the ball was when the player was down.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that's something that you should watch for this week, Chip. I'm going to continue to monitor this, but thanks for the question, Adam. And if you want to ask us questions for the Silver Bullets podcast mailbag, just use the hashtag SBPmailbag on Twitter. You can tweet to me at Mike36fan or to Chip at Chip Minnick, and you spell his last name Minnich.
And we also had a question from at Fool in the Rain. Love the Twitter handle. Love the band more, but I love the Twitter handle. And the question was about the chances of either the Wisconsin game or Penn State game starting later than 3:30 because I have to put in time off requests soon, if so. And here was my answer, because as we're recording this, there is no official kickoff time yet for either the Wisconsin game on October 26th or November 23rd. But here's my guess, and I realize, like you said, you have to put in time off requests. So, Michael, if you have a different opinion, please do not be shy in sharing it. My belief is, as we sit here recording this, I believe the Wisconsin game on October 26th is going to be a noon kickoff on Fox. And the reason why I'm suggesting that is looking at the Big Ten conference schedule right now as we're sitting here. Besides that game, Notre Dame is playing at Michigan, and I'm fairly certain it's not anything conclusive, but I'm fairly certain that that's going to be a game that will be televised by ABC. Even if I think if the Wolverines, if they are kind of mediocre, I think that's the game that they'll want to put on at night. And I think the Wisconsin at Ohio State game is a noon kickoff, not only because of Fox having that new philosophy of putting what they consider their best game on at noon, but also Fox has the World Series. And I believe that evening that is a dedicated World Series night. I can't remember precisely in terms of if it's like Game 6 or I can tell you that in a moment here. But on October 26th, that should be, as a matter of fact, that's Game 4 of the World Series on Fox. So my point being is, I think if Fox is going to be showing baseball on October 26th, that's going to open it up for Wisconsin and Ohio State at noon. And as far as the other question about Penn State, I would think that depending on if Ohio State is still undefeated, as we all hope, at that point, I would think that would also be a noon kickoff on Fox on November 23rd.
Yeah, the late November games I don't think will be late games. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go with your very good analysis, Chip, on the October 26th game. I don't know, what Fox would do with the World Series. I know there have been daytime World Series games, but I don't know if that is in the plans for this particular year. So I will go with what you said, and I appreciate you bringing this question to my attention because I didn't see it when I did the hashtag search. So is that somebody that just contacted you?
Yeah, he had. It was actually a two-part question, wanting to know why we didn't have a podcast last week, and then the other part was about the kickoff times for Wisconsin and for Penn State, and so that's why I said I would let him know when we recorded the podcast for this week. So I may be mistaken. I'm not trying to influence you at Fool in the Rain in terms of I have no idea how quickly you have to get your vacation requests in, or your I can't remember exactly how you said that in terms of you have to put in time off requests. I do know that the kickoff time for October 26th, we probably will not know for another 2 weeks, so October 14th, and that's usually not until after 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is usually when the Big Ten, as well as the other conferences, start to release their kickoff times. It's very annoying, but depending on how immediate you need to get those time off requests, I would be thinking it's going to probably be a noon game for the Wisconsin game.
Yeah, and you can always call in sick.
He said that. I did not. And, of course, if your boss listens to our podcast, then now you got more trouble. So
yeah, I mean, people do get sick even when it's coincidentally a game day.
It has been known to happen.
Yeah, the burden of proof that you're not sick is on them. Is all I'm saying. Or you could go out and have a really, really big night the night before and make sure you're sick.
Then now you're just ruining it.
It's self-inflicted, but it's still not feeling good. All right, appreciate everybody that sent in questions. The couple of you that did, please hit us up with the hashtag SBP mailbag. At Mike36fan on Twitter or at Chip Minnick, MINNICH on Twitter, and we'll answer your questions on the air. All right, Chip, before we get out of here, let us discuss the Spartans of Michigan State University.
Well, I think they are certainly looking better than they did a couple weeks ago against Arizona State. As you said, they're not able to run the ball well, but Brian Lewerke is certainly, showing that he is effective passing the ball. I'm still pretty much scarred from, God, is it scary to say this out loud? Over 20 years ago, when a Michigan State team came into Columbus I don't think that was a dedicated. I think that was a 3:30 kickoff. It was just because it was November. It was dark by the time the game ended. But I'm still scarred from that from 20 years ago. I'm sure I still have wet clothes from 4 years ago, sitting in the driving rain when Michigan State came in 2015. So psychologically, the Spartans have given me enough to be concerned about. But from what I have seen from this Ohio State team, from what I do know of Michigan State offensively, like you said, the struggle to run the ball, I think that they are going to be annoying, and they will be I know it's going to sound like a broken record here. I think Ohio State's going to have to play a 4-quarter game. We keep saying that week after week, but I truly believe that this defense is good enough to kind of slow down the game, slow down the pace enough that Ohio State will not be able to run as roughshod as they have over their previous 5 opponents.
Yeah, Gerd brought up a good point about Michigan State and also Northwestern, is that they turn these games into street fights, and they kind of drag you down to their level, is the way he put it. And I think that's accurate. I think that they find ways to just muck up the game and turn it into something where they can hang around and be effective and be in it and give themselves a chance to win. I think they're both teams that are good at that. I think if Michigan State can't run the ball, it's going to be a problem. And right now, they have Elijah Collins, who is averaging 82 yards a game. He's a freshman running back, 413 yards on the season and 3 touchdowns. But their most effective weapon in the run game has been Brian Lewerke, because he's able to both scramble out of trouble on pass plays or do designed runs. And it's the scheme that they use. He's very difficult to stop. If they need 3 yards on 3rd and 3, he somehow finds a way to get 3.5 or 4. and that's the kind of thing that can give you long sustained drives and kind of frustrate the defense a little bit. So that's something Ohio State will have to deal with, I feel like, if they're going to be successful in this game.
No doubt. I mean, if anything, I think I mean, they are going to, just looking at Michigan State's roster, and I know this is going to seem like, okay, this can't possibly be as big a deal as I perpetually make it out to be. But, I mean, I'm just looking at just the sheer number of players on that roster that have an OH at the end of their hometown, and there's a lot of them. And the only reason I bring this up is because this is the kind of thing that Mark D'Antonio, I know in the past, has really excelled with, kind of pointing out, like, hey, they didn't even offer you a scholarship. I mean, the reality is, like, some of these guys, like, I just know, and I know we don't really get into too much recruiting until that time of the year. But a name that jumps out at me, he's a true freshman, so he's not really a factor in this one. An offensive lineman from Strongsville, Ohio, named J.D. Duplain, who Ohio State offered a scholarship to late, but Duplain had been a verbal commitment to Michigan State and decided to stick with his commitment. So the point is that, I mean, not all these guys can say, oh, they didn't even offer me a scholarship. I mean, like, there are a decent number of players on this roster who warranted Ohio State offers. Makes you wonder, how intensely Ohio State recruited them. But yeah, I think it's a street fight whenever you play these guys. I mean, it's definitely, Mark D'Antonio, say what you will about his faults and failings as a head coach. He turns this game into a street fight and kind of, if anything, as Gerd succinctly stated, they kind of bring you down to their level of play, to kind of make it just kind of a physical brawl. Mm-hmm. So we'll see, how Ohio State responds to that.
Indeed. And it's, one of the things that they do well is that Lewerke he's a veteran quarterback. He's very poised. He has a very quick release, and he's also able to escape trouble, to the point that Michigan State's only conceded 4 sacks this year.
I did not know that. Only 4.
4 for 19 yards. That's pretty great, and that's a credit to Lewerke, a credit to the offensive line in some respects, and the Buckeyes will have their work cut out for them, because if the Buckeyes do what we think they'll do, is stop the run, then it's going to force Michigan State into throwing the ball more, which is not unusual for them this year. They have thrown the ball a lot because they have to. Lewerke is throwing for over 250 yards a game. He's at 265 yards per game. He's got 10 touchdowns and only 1 interception. So he's a quarterback, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Could be seeing him on Sundays in the future. And he's a guy that when they have opportunities to get him on the ground, the Buckeyes have to do that. They have to finish those plays.
A guy that I'm concerned about when I look at offensively, like you said, since they're not, no disrespect meant towards Elijah Collins. I mean, I know he's running for over 5 yards a carry, but they really haven't been able to run the ball too well. But at wideout for Michigan State, Darrell Stewart Jr., he's a senior. He's listed 6'2", 216 pounds. But he's averaging 23 yards a catch. Now, by and large, I should say he's averaging 23. That was against Indiana, but okay. So far, in terms of like his typical average,
he's over 100 yards a game. He's 111 yards a game.
Correct. He's and so he's kind of their, if you want to think of like their big play wideout. How Ohio State chooses to cover him. We were singing the praises of Jeffrey Okudah earlier. This might be who he draws as his assignment.
Mm-hmm. Matt Sabert is a tight end that is going to be involved in the offense. They like to use him around when they get inside the 10. He has 3 touchdowns. He and Stewart each have 3 touchdowns on the year. Cody White, a junior, has 2 touchdowns. He's another guy that the Buckeyes will have to look out for. 51 yards per game on average. So, Ohio State has this stable of wide receivers. Michigan State's got 2 very sturdy, very steady starting wideouts and a tight end that can get the job done as well. So behind them, it's really a hodgepodge, like guys that only have a few catches. Those are the main guys. 35 receptions for Darrell Stewart Jr. and 20 for Cody White, 11 for Matt Siebert. And it's those are the guys that really Ohio State's going to have to pay attention to. And I think this is going to be a game where it might be really ugly and bogged down, and I think Ohio State will pull away later in the game because I just don't think Michigan State has the depth.
No, they don't. I mean, especially as you said, if you have difficulty running the ball, and Michigan State, as we said, they have talent, at with Brian Lewerke, they have talented wide receivers, but if Ohio State can make you one-dimensional, and oh, by the way, you've got, now granted, like an offensive line that's only given up 4 sacks, but how good have the opposing defensive linemen been? I mean, have they played against somebody as good as, Chase Young? We'll see. I definitely think that Ohio State, the advantage there is not only in terms of the depth, but, with that defense as they've been thriving so far this year, and the mere fact that they might have the opportunity to make Michigan State truly one-dimensional, I think it's going to make it that much more difficult for Michigan State to keep pace with an Ohio State offense that, let's face it, has been averaging about 40 points a game. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be so bold as to say that that's going to happen again. I do think that there's something to be said about that street fight mentality that these guys are going to be bringing with them to Columbus. But I certainly think that Michigan State, they'll make it interesting for most of the game, but I think Ohio State has too much depth, as you said, and too much speed for the Spartans to keep pace.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting, too, to see if Ohio State can keep from having a letdown after the big win at Nebraska. That the Spartans will be up for this game. This is going to be a statement game for them. If they can get a win in this game, it's going to be a springboard for the rest of the season. So they're going to give you everything they have. I expect that the offensive line is going to see a lot of stunts and a lot of different blitzes from the Michigan State defense that they haven't seen yet. So it'll be a good test for this rebuilt offensive line that has handled everything so far, but they have not had a test of this magnitude so far against a defense like this.
I agree with you.
So the guys you got to look out for on that Michigan State defense, Joe Bacci, a senior linebacker, is a guy you're going to have to look out for. He is he's averaging 9 tackles a game, and he seems like he's everywhere when you watch Michigan State play. He's all over the place. And I cannot pronounce this guy's last name. Senior defensive lineman Kenny, is it Willix?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay. He's another guy you're going to have to watch out for. Those are really the 2 main defensive studs for Michigan State. They're going to make a lot of plays. Ohio State's going to have to find ways to get them blocked. But the big thing is, if Ohio State's going to run the ball, Chip, is going to be difficult to continue to get the offensive linemen to that second level. And that's why Joe Bacci is successful, because his defensive line does a good job of keeping him clean. Yeah,
Joe Bacci is one of those guys that excuse me, I think he does have, kind of that grudge about, okay, Ohio State didn't offer him a scholarship. I mean, he's from a suburb of the Cleveland area, Brook Park, Ohio, never got a scholarship offer. He plays like a typical Mark D'Antonio linebacker, just tough, seemingly in on every play. So like you said, I think it's going to be interesting to see, how active Joe Bacci is, because that Ohio State offensive line that's been thriving so far, they're going to certainly need to make sure that they, account for him on just about every play. And as far as Kenny Willix goes, he's the Spartans' leading sacker. He has 4 sacks. He's probably the most, I guess you could say, the most underrated defensive lineman that in the Big Ten, since Chase Young gets all the pub and naturally deserving of it. Kenny Willicks is definitely one of those guys that, he's, hardworking and he's got the stats to back him up, with 4 sacks so far this year. And, I was going to say, I think he actually has a couple of fumble recoveries as well. He's definitely, one of these guys that's going to be very, very active on that Michigan State defensive line.
Indeed. So, Chip, this one's going to be a difficult one, I think, to pin down. But give me your pick to click on offense for Ohio State.
Okay. On offense. All right. So even though I was very complimentary of him, and I think that he will definitely have a vital part to play, I am not going with J.K. Dobbins. I think we were just talking about, Joe Bacci, and I think J.K. Dobbins, I think is going to he's going to play well, but he's not my click to pick. I think he's going to probably be needing an ice bath after this Michigan State defense hits him repeatedly. I think he's going to earn his keep. My click to pick though is going to be I'm going to go with Chris Olave.
All right, you keep saying click to pick, and it's driving me crazy because I have OCD. It's your pick to click.
Sorry.
That's all right. So you're on Chris Olave.
Chris Olave.
All right, let me get that down in the old sheet here before I forget. Okay, Chris Olave. All right, I'm with you on this. I don't think it's going to be a running back game. Michigan State is 7th nationally in total defense, 14th in scoring defense. Now, Indiana was able to make some plays on this defense, but it was Michael Penix having a good game. I think Justin Fields is going to need to make some plays in the passing game. I think that the Spartans are going to force Justin Fields to win this game, I think, with his arm. I think he'll still, be able to do some damage with his legs, but I'm going to say Justin Fields because I think that's what Michigan State is going to force from Ohio State, is force Justin Fields to prove that as a quarterback he can beat a good defense.
Okay, I like it.
All right, so defense is where we now have to take our picks to click, and I get to go first. And I am going to say, after a couple weeks of seeing Jeffrey Okudah doing what he's been doing, it would be probably pretty easy to take him. I'm going to go backward to somebody I took a couple weeks ago who's been a little quiet, I think, at times, but I think he's going to be asked to step up in this game. I think he's going to be asked to do a little more. And I don't really know why I think that other than I just have a gut feeling. But I'm going to say Shaun Wade.
Okay.
And I think that he's a guy who, if the Spartans can't run the football, and I suspect Ohio State won't be able to, won't let them run the football, I think, consistently. I think Lewerke will be able to make some plays with his legs. But I think Wade is going to have to be on the field at times, and I think he's going to make some plays. I think that from what I've seen from Ohio State's defense in recent weeks, Damon Arnett's been fine. He hardly ever gets targeted anymore. He's become that typical Ohio State cornerback that doesn't get thrown at, and I think that's helped Jeffrey Okudah this year. So I think that I think Jordan Fuller. This is a kind of a Jordan Fuller game, kind of a Shaun Wade game, that kind of thing.
Okay, I like it.
What do you got?
I like the versatility of Mr. Pete Werner.
Okay.
Simply because I think he kind of demonstrated against Nebraska, even though we were talking about Michigan State struggling to run the ball effectively. I think Werner, he's kind of shown that, okay, he can kind of be all over the field if necessary. So I'm going to go with Pete Werner in this one.
Okay. So it's time for predictions, Chip. And by the way, who would have thought we'd have had Pete Werner as a pick to click?
I know.
Last year, 2 weeks in a row, somebody's picked Pete Werner. I'm going to give you mine first because it always seems like I'm kind of piggybacking similar to what you're doing. I'm going to give you my prediction first. I think this is going to be a tight game, through halftime. I think Ohio State's going to pull away with superior depth. I think they're going to wear out those the Michigan State lines on both sides of the field, and I'm going to say 38-20 Ohio State.
Okay, I like it.
All right, what do you got?
All right, so that street fight mentality, I think, is going to be enough where it's going to be into the fourth quarter, and all of a sudden, as you said, the depth, the speed, all that is it's going to break open in Ohio State's favor, and the Spartans aren't going to be able to keep up. But I also believe that they're going to do enough to kind of slow down Ohio State enough where it's not going to look nearly as impressive, but it's going to get the job done. So comparable to you, but I'm going to go a little different. I'm going to say Ohio State 35, Michigan State 17.
Okay. So, yeah, I've kind of been adjusting on the fly because I look at this prediction I made, and I look at the one I made last week, and last week was 38-24, and this week 38-20, and the differences are that I thought more of Nebraska's offense last year and last week, and this week I think more of Michigan State's defense, but I also think that I'm starting to buy a little bit of the Ohio State hype a little bit, and how well they've played to date, and how they've played every game with sort of like they're angry at the world, and sort of like they've got something to prove. And it was kind of the way that, I forget who it was, maybe it was Gus Johnson. Somebody had mentioned J.K. Dobbins runs like he's angry at the end zone or whatever it was. But whatever that was, it was like, yeah, okay, if you're angry at the end zone and you run like that, then that's kind of how Ohio State has been this year. It's almost been like when they're on the field, they've been pretty ruthless.
Yes, ruthless is, I think, a very good term.
So it's whatever it takes, whether that's running the football, whether it's throwing the football. It's just like it's really the Alabama attitude, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, I think that they are just playing kind of. I mean, there is definitely an axe to grind about the preconceived notion as to that they were not a good defense. I think you said J.K. Dobbins is running angry. I mean, there's just a lot of let's just say that maybe that there's kind of a internal belief within the team that will show you that we're fine even without Urban Meyer directing us. I don't know what it is, but there's certainly, like you said, kind of a angry, ruthless approach that this team has taken, and I'm not seeing any signs of that abating. Certainly hope it doesn't this weekend against Michigan State.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michigan State has been, I think, a program that has been a bit in decline in recent years, but they're still a team that has played better against Ohio State in Ohio Stadium than they have in East Lansing, it seems like, in the last 6-7 years.
Oh, I know that. I can attest to that from personal experience. In 2015, as a matter of fact, it wasn't until I want to say a couple years ago, after Ohio State was shellacked by Iowa, and they came home, and a lot of people were kind of writing Ohio State off for dead, that all of a sudden Ohio State exploded. Mike Weber had those long touchdown runs. That it finally swung in Ohio State's favor. The dominant performance, at home, in 2017, and then last year was kind of thanks to Drew Chrisman, more of a special teams thing. So Ohio State's they're riding, a 3-game winning streak over the Spartans. But you're right, it's definitely been the kind of thing where the visiting team has usually done better than the home team.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll find out what happens Saturday night in blackout conditions in Columbus as the Spartans head into the Horseshoe to take on the Buckeyes, and that's going to be interesting to see how does Ryan Day prepare his team after a shellacking of the Cornhuskers on the road. How does he get them back up and focused? I think all you got to do is talk about those two stats that I just gave you a little bit ago. 14th ranked scoring defense and 7th ranked total defense in the country for Michigan State, and I think that's your motivation there is like, how do we get after that defense? And I think that the team will take it as a challenge, and I think your pick of Chris Olave is a good one, and I think the team is going to need to throw the football to be successful. Maybe a game where you need to throw to open up the run.
No, I certainly agree with that. I think, J.K. Dobbins is going to be a marked man, and the easiest way to kind of open up some of those running lanes for him is, as you said, I think by throwing the ball over the Spartans' heads. I think that's going to kind of, instead of them crowding the line of scrimmage, I think that's going to open up the running game. But it will probably be, like I said, midway through the second into the third quarter that you'll start to see Ohio State start to be able to effectively move the ball. I think it's going to be a field position game. As you said, I think it's going to be a slugfest between two really good defenses.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm really interested to see that first play. Is it going to be the typical handoff to J.K. Dobbins, or I would love to see it if they have decent field position to do a play action pass on the first play and just take your shot right off the bat. Go over the top, take the top off of that Michigan State defense, and if you hit that play, you instantly put that team back on its heels. Yeah,
that wouldn't be a bad thing. We'll just have to see if Ryan Day is kind of got a little bit of riverboat gambler in him.
Yeah. Well, it'll be fun. We'll be back next week to talk about the Michigan State game. And, of course, we'll have plenty left to talk about. We will have a week off before the Northwestern game, which is on a Friday night, which we'll both be, grumbling about. But, we'll have the Michigan State game to talk about, and we'll have plenty of topics. But be sure to get your questions in to us on Twitter. Once again, the Twitter account that you use, Chip, is?
At Chip Minnick, Minnich.
And I'm at Mike36Fan. And you can hit us up with the hashtag SBP Mailbag. And we'll be happy to answer your questions on the air. Be sure to listen to the other Ozone Radio Network shows. Of course, the Sloopcast. They're still on Mondays and Fridays, Chip, both 2 days a week.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And, of course, the Buckeye Weekly podcast is on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays before and after the game. Every second Wednesday. They're on all the time. Just subscribe, and you'll never miss a show.
Yeah, I was going to say, you also get the traveling exploits of Tony and Tom.
Absolutely. All right, Chip, where else can people find you?
They can find me, besides this podcast, of course, they can find me on the Ozone as well as a contributor to Athlon Sports.
Yeah, you can find me at theozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon section, and you can read my grumpy old Buckeye column every week. And please take it with the tongue firmly planted in cheek with which it was intended. I'm not really that grumpy about some of the things I'm grumping about, but that's the name of the column. So I gotta find stuff to grump about.
Absolutely.
All right, Chip, that will do it for this edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. We'll be back to do it again all next week. So nothing left to do now but say, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.